All right, good afternoon. We'll go ahead and get started with the afternoon presentation. So thanks all for joining us. I am Edward Williams, the Digital Entertainment and E-commerce Analyst for BMO. And I'm pleased to have with us here today Carl Sladoff, who is President of Take-Two Interactive. For those of you who do have questions, feel free to, we'll ask for questions later on, but you can also submit questions via your app, and I will see them up here. But Carl, just to go ahead and get us started, obviously this has been a key fall for the interactive entertainment industry as a whole, for Take-Two specifically, going back to the launch of GTA 5. But if we look specifically at the launches of PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, how would you characterize how the launches have been relative to what you were thinking of and relative to what you've seen in prior cycles?
Okay. Well, look, I mean, we're actually very pleased and excited about where the launches are right now. And, this is all caveated with the idea that this is still early days. And when you're coming out with a console cycle near the holiday season, there is an underlying expectation that whatever product is, there's pent-up demand, and whatever product is in the market will typically sell out or close to being sold out. But this was a little bit different because there's a lot of noise around the gaming industry in general and a lot of question about whether this console cycle will have the same juice, this one that we're going into, will have the same juice as the previous console cycle. And there's a lot of doubters about whether or not the console market in general is dead. And I think the successful launches for the PS4 and the Xbox One have proven that obviously console gaming is alive and well, and people were very excited about these launches. And to sell 1 million units in the first day across both consoles do that. I think they both have now announced that they've sold over 2 million units each. That's a pretty quick uptake. I believe Sony, and I don't want to speak for Sony, but Sony said that it took them, I believe, a month or 2 weeks to sell 1 million units before. I can't remember the specific thing, but it took much longer time. So the uptake has been very quick, and I think that's a very positive sign for us. But again, we'll learn more as things go out. And also as more content's available on the systems, you're going to get a real sense for what the appetite is for this generation coming up. But to date, we're very pleased and very excited about it.
From your perspective, if we were to look at NBA 2K, can you give us a little bit of color as to the differences in costs associated with bringing games out on PS4 and Xbox One relative to prior console cycles? So my recollection is that with the launch of the 360 and the PS3, there's a massive increase in development costs.
Right.
Are we looking at the same sort of function of an increase in costs, or how would you characterize that?
Yeah, I would definitely characterize it as, look, you can always spend more money. And with more capabilities, which these systems do have, you always have the ability to add more to the games, which by definition should put pressure on costs, and you'll have increased costs. But the magnitude of the increase is much, much smaller than it was going from the last generation to this generation, and primarily based on the fact that we're already in an HD, in a high-definition mode with our current generation. So you're not going to see that size of leap that you had last time. But like I said before, there is opportunity to do more, and that should translate into higher cost. But importantly, mitigating that higher cost, I think, is the efficiencies that we've gained over the last generation in terms of the structure of our organization. And I'm speaking specifically for Take-Two at this point, but it's probably an industry-wide phenomenon where we've got bigger teams now. We don't have small teams. We've got bigger teams. The teams are gelled together. They've already been through big investments, so you pick up efficiencies there. So we're better at doing these big investment games than we were before. So that pickup in efficiency is going to make a big difference. Also, we have some development synergies that exist in this next generation, which didn't necessarily exist in the last generation. In other words, the chipsets are much more similar between the PS4 and the Xbox One than they were before. And that helps us gain efficiencies when we're developing across platform. So while there is an ability to add features and spend more money, it is mitigated by the efficiencies that we're picking up on the development side.
Okay, and when do you think we'll get to an installed base of these consoles that will allow for you guys to have a material amount of your revenues on the next-gen systems? Is it something that happens kind of at some point during 2014, or do we have to get to holiday 2014?
I think it really depends ultimately in the industry on the release schedule and your specific release schedule. As you mentioned before, we have our basketball game, NBA 2K14, is currently out on next-gen consoles. It's out on the PS4 and it's out on the Xbox One at this point. And we're very pleased how that is going. Our scores are incredibly high, particularly for new generation release in a sports game. We've done very well. We've done much better than the competition in that regard. That's a positive thing. And in general, our NBA game as a whole, so if you look at the current generation and the next generation together, we've actually sold in more units combined than we did last year on just the current generation. So you hear a lot in the industry right now about the problems that developers are having in the transition period and the risks that are associated with transition, which are all very true. But in our specific situation, because we only have one game right now for next gen, we're not seeing that. We're actually seeing, because our product is a high quality product, the current gen version, the PS3 and the 360 version, and the PS4 and the Xbox One version are actually different games, and they're with different development cycles behind them. So as a combined unit, we're actually seeing an increase over last year in terms of selling at this point. So we're not seeing that pain in transition. And I think it's really about the product that you put out. If you just put a product out that's a straight port and you don't do anything with it, then obviously you're going to put yourself more at risk. You still may make money, but you're not going to do as well as you otherwise would have if you add content to it or do something that's a little bit different. So in terms of when is it going to be a meaningful part of our revenue, again, that depends release on release. And I would say that where we are in the console cycle, we're going to know much more about how robust this is. It will be in the next holiday season. Whether it's a meaningful part of our revenue or anyone else's revenue is really on an individual release-by-release basis.
Okay. There are a couple of questions coming in on the iPad app here. First of all, there's a question just kind of within these next-gen consoles about Ultra HD capabilities. So are you seeing any Ultra HD capabilities, or are you working on any titles that are in Ultra HD?
Well, we haven't really discussed what we're working on in terms of that context, so I don't really have anything to share with you on that.
Okay. And then if we can shift gears a little bit, I'll start off with this one. There's a question here about GTA Online, and the question being, how big can this get? There's a lot of debate out there around MMO model given World of Warcraft decline. Can GTA buck this trend? What are monetization plans? Right.
Well, in terms of GTA Online, I think like any property, and this goes for whether it's an online persistent world or whether it's just a release, the success of whatever that release is going to be depending on the quality of the content and the depth at which the consumer engages with that content. And in terms of our expectations around GTA Online and where we are today, it hasn't been that long. Obviously GTA Online went live in October. We started offering our cash packs or monetization on November 7th. So we're about a month into it. So I don't have any specifics to share with you in terms of how we've monetized and how well that's going at this point. But I can tell you that people are highly engaged and there are a lot of people playing, and it's going very, very well at this point. And it really is a matter how big can it get and how good it can get is really a question of the content. And Rockstar recently released some pretty robust information about what's coming down the pike, and they've only really talked about what's coming in December and some point in 2014. There's a lot of user-generated content opportunities with the creator modes, both the deathmatch and the race mode. There's also a capture mode, which is sort of like a capture the flag mode, all of which is cooperative or competitive gameplay. And they've also announced some plans, without any real specifics, about incremental content associated with formal heists, actual heists for online, and also story mode content. So there's a lot of content planned out there for release, and I think how good can be really depends on how much do you continue to engage with the consumer. And at this point, obviously, Rockstar is incredibly good at that, and we expect them to continue to do what they're great at.
Can you give us a little bit of color, with the massive launch of GTA 5, can you give us a little color as to the sustained usage of the product at this point, especially kind of post the launches of the next-gen systems? Are you seeing any changes in playing patterns?
Yeah, I don't have any specifics to share with you, but needless to say, the engagement with the game is incredibly high, and I think that's really reflected with how well our sales have gone at this point. And they have gone well. I think we've announced that we have sold in 29 million units. But in terms of the actual, how people are engaging with the game, I don't have any real specific stats to share with you today. But it's a GTA game, and GTA games are very deep games with a lot of things to do, a lot of content, and people tend to try to get their money's worth. So I'd say things are going very well in that regard.
Okay. And then you've got a number of initiatives in Asia, partnering with Tencent, Nexon, XL Games. Can you characterize what the opportunity is in the Asian market as a whole, or what you're looking to achieve out of those partnerships?
Sure. So our original theory about going to Asia, and I'm talking about everywhere except Japan, because Japan's a little bit of a different market versus some of the other markets in Asia. And the Asian market is large. I think we're in the vicinity of $11 billion or so of value created in video games. And most of that is online free-to-play. So the best way to go after those markets is obviously to go and attack that business model. We decided to go at it a little bit different way. Rather than invest a substantial amount of money into going into a market that we didn't know much about, the best approach for us was to go and partner with the best of breed. Folks who have actually been doing free-to-play for quite a while, understand the market better, and actually really need content. They need franchises, which we bring to the table. So for China specifically, we did a deal with Tencent with our NBA game, which launched in October of 2012. So we're about a year into that. We also launched a game with Nexon in Korea around a baseball game, which we did a launch in May of this year. And we have a deal with XL Games for a release of Civilization Online, which is going to be a very robust undertaking around our Civilization franchise, initially for the Korean market. So those are the three initiatives that we've gone after. And the idea here is partner with the best of breed, partner with folks who have done it before, bring your content to bear, build franchise value and brand in those markets, and mitigate your downside and be in a position to take advantage of the upside. So that's been our approach in Asia. Now, should these be successful, and it's still early days, obviously these are online properties and they have a very consistent earnings flow. So that it should help us, again, if successful, smooth out our earnings curve over time.
Okay. Do you see the role of free-to-play becoming more significant in the Western markets?
Yeah, I think it can be. I think there are very few examples of where that's worked on a massive scale. There are some. But I do think it's something that consumers seem to like, and it looks there are opportunities to achieve strong business models in that regard. So I think with the new technology and the connected environments, both with PC, it's a no-brainer, but also with new console systems where connectivity seems to be a heavy focus for the next generation, you're going to have more opportunity to experiment with business models. And we don't necessarily think of it in very rigid terms of free-to-play versus, paid content. For us, it's really more about post-release monetization. And what's the best way to keep consumers continually engaged in your content post-release, whether it's a big tentpole release or whether it's just an initial beta release in an online context. Keeping the consumer engaged and monetizing them in the most appropriate way. And you can do that through one-time payments, you can do it through DLC, you can do it through free-to-play, you can experiment. But the good news is we'll have the opportunity to do that. And I think that, for sure, it will be a change in the industry. You'll see more experimentation. What will ultimately be the prevailing business model remains to be seen.
Okay. There are a couple more. You guys are a prolific crowd, and I've got lots of questions coming through here. There's another question from the audience, which is about the mobile gaming market. What are your thoughts about the mobile gaming market?
Well, right now, the mobile gaming market, and again, I should be clear about how we tend to think of the industry. We don't really think of it in the context of platforms, whether it's PC, console, or mobile platforms. We think really more in the context of core versus casual experiences. And while we do dabble in casual experiences, most of what we do is for the core gamer. We do high quality, in-depth entertainment experiences, and that's our bread and butter. And that will continue to be our bread and butter for quite some time. Not to say we won't experiment with casual, but we definitely are a core company at our heart. So that's an important lens that we look through first. As it turns out, most of the mobile experiences to date have been more casual, and that's just based on the limitations of the platform themselves. That being said, we're highly active in the mobile space. We've taken our core franchises and we brought them to mobile tablets, or to phones and to tablets. The GTA 3, the 10-year anniversary edition, is a good example of that. We recently announced that San Andreas is coming out. We've done Civilization titles, XCOM titles. So and our NBA title, not just catalog, our NBA title, there's a full version of the simulation game that's available in a tablet form. So we do bring our core experiences, and that will continue to be. We'll keep pushing that platform as long as the core customer wants to engage in that platform. So that's one thing that we're doing. We see a lot of opportunity there. And it's a no-brainer. It doesn't cost a huge amount of money for us to do it, and it's easy for us to monetize. The second piece of it that we find very attractive is coming up with companion applications or side-by-side content that you can use to help to encourage people to engage with your core franchises in 5-minute, 10-minute bites on the road. These are things like our NBA Everywhere concept, where we have the My Player app, where you can do things that are very separate from the core console game, but they affect your experience either through virtual currency or earning training points, things like that. It'll affect your experience in the core console. So for us, that's also been a significant focus, is to use the mobile device sort of as a second screen experience to make encourage the consumers to engage more deeply with our core product. And the third component is, for us, is we do experiment with some more casual things. And it's a little bit more venture-oriented. The risks aren't very big, and you tend to have to do a lot of them to kind of find the next Angry Birds. But it is something that we've done. We've experimented with it. But again, it's not really our focus, but it's something that we obviously are interested in looking at.
Okay. Just staying with my iPad here for questions for a moment. There's another one. Given the success of GTA, which was hailed as a cultural event by the media, is there any way to speed up development of those kinds of blockbuster releases? There's a question. The answer to that is there's always yes. There's always a way to speed up development, and then you have to ask your question of, do you want to? Is it the right business decision to make? And if you could speed up development and not sacrifice quality, and every time you come out with whether it's GTA or a different product, every time you came out with it, if you could do it and take video gaming to the next level, which is what happens every time GTA comes out, it sets a new standard for video gaming. If you could do that every year, and if you could do that without tiring out your franchise, then that would be a really good thing. Now, we don't fundamentally believe that's not possible, certainly without sacrificing investing in other IP. And for us specifically, it's very important to invest in other products because we don't want to be ever in a situation where a product sort of runs its life cycle and then there's nothing there to replace it. So we're very focused on new IP. So there's always an opportunity cost to dedicating all of your resources or the vast majority of your resources towards any one franchise. It may work really well in the short term, but it's a very dangerous thing to do in the long term, and that's not something that we're interested in doing. That being said, there's always room for us to improve, and it's not necessarily just about coming out with GTA every 2 years versus 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. It's finding a way to keep the consumer engaged with the franchise in between tentpole releases whenever they happen. And I think that we've seen before, and Rockstar is one of the original innovators on DLC content with GTA 4, we have more tools at our disposal, and GTA Online is another example of that, where we can keep the consumer engaged with the franchise in between these tentpole releases, so it doesn't matter quite as much when they come out. And that's obviously a path that we can choose to take if that's the right business decision for us. Just to kind of follow up on that for a little bit, what's your thought on the number of kind of major releases that Take-Two can bring out, or maybe should bring out on an annual basis, if we should look at it that way?
Well, whether you should or you shouldn't, that's the way you're going to look at it. And I think, I think history is a decent barometer in general, and the question is, what is a major release? So every release we do at this point in time, at this point, given our focus, there are different business models where you go after smaller bets. But as a whole, everything that we do on a go-forward basis, the intention is to create a real franchise, is to create a major release. So are we a company, given where we sit right now, where we're going to be doing 10, 12, 15 major releases a year? That's just not who we are. But on average, when you're doing 5, 4, 3, 6, it depends on the year. But I think that you're sort of in that vicinity, of 2 to 7. Yeah. But other than that, it's kind of hard to give you any more detail because it will vary year to year.
Are there any questions from the audience? Besides ones that were in here. All right, they're preferring to email them, I guess, than to use their voices. Let's go to look at the balance sheet a little bit. So you've got a lot of cash. Yep. Can you talk about your capital allocation thoughts? And you obviously just did a substantial buyback of a block of stock. What can we look for from along those lines? staying within that context, can we also look at, what are your thoughts around M&A possibilities?
Right. So in terms of capital allocation, obviously we allocate our capital with growth in mind. And we did, obviously we just did do a share buyback. So that's always, returning cash to shareholders, as we've said before, is always an option that we consider. Excuse me. But putting that aside, there's, first and foremost, the best use of our capital is to invest in what we do best. And what we do best is to engage in developing core games that we think that could become hit product and ultimately long-term value as franchises. I mean, we strongly believe that to create value in an entertainment business, the best way to do that is to create franchises. And to create franchises, each of these games is a significant investment. And we want to make sure that we're always well capitalized to deploy that investment into what we do, what we do is we develop games. So that's first and foremost. So the vast majority of our capital should and always be allocated into investing into our core business. In addition to that, M&A is something that we've been looking at for the past 7 years, and we've done some of it. We've bought studios, we've bought individual IPs, and what we look for specifically is we look for content, we look for IP value, we look for technology, and we look for teams. Those are the things that are very valuable to us from an M&A perspective. We don't look to invest in headlines, right? We don't deploy hundreds of millions of dollars into social gaming because that's what everybody wants to talk about, or into a mobile gaming company that has one product. That's not what we do. That's not something that is, for us, is an investment that makes a lot of sense. That you might get lucky, but it's a wing and a prayer is not necessarily a good investment strategy. We look for investments that are going to be immediately or very soon accretive to earnings, and that includes the actual purchase price as well. We don't just look at it. If you buy an entity that is creating net income, then obviously it's accretive. But you want to make sure you're actually buying at the right valuation because we actually value our balance sheet. And if we issue stock, we recognize that there's dilution. So fundamentally, it has to be a company that we believe is going to derive significant value to us in the future. We're not just looking to put money to work. We're looking for the right opportunity. So if we do see, and every M&A deal that's been done in the video game space, we've seen it before it came. And we've decided, for the most part, not to take the bait on some of these things. And we've gotten pressure to do so. But in general, what we're looking for, again, is we're looking for content, we're looking for tech, and we're looking for teams that will help us grow our core business.
Okay. And then Take-Two has a history of peaks and valleys with regards to its earnings, especially coming out of non-GTA years.
Yep.
You guys have made comments of late that your expectation is that you'll be able to sustain a profitable business in a non-GTA release year. Can you give us a little bit of color as to what gives you the confidence in your ability to achieve that, and maybe some of the steps that have changed, or
right.
systems that have changed over the course of the last 7 years since
right.
you guys have been there?
So since I've been with the company, we've done that twice. We've had profitability and substantial profitability in certain circumstances without a major release of GTA. So we know we can do it. And now the question is, why can we say now that we've got confidence that we will be profitable every year for the foreseeable future? And I think it really boils down to two things. And one of them is, when you look at our IP, what we have now, what's different from us where we sit today versus where we sit in the previous transition from the last gen to the current gen. The biggest difference we have is we have much more IP. We've got better IP than we did before. We were very reliant on Grand Theft Auto. Now, the beauty of Grand Theft Auto is we're always going to have peaks with Grand Theft Auto because every time Grand Theft Auto comes out, you're going to have a great year, and that's luxury, and that's something that we embrace. I'd rather have those years than not. I'll take those peaks, over having a smooth curve without those peaks because it's very valuable, and obviously these are watershed events for us. Excuse me, but now we've got a much broader set of IP, which we invested in over the last generation. We have 9 franchises that have sold 5 million units or more in a single release. So it's 9 franchises with 5 million unit sellers in one single release, which puts us in a very different position than it did from the last transition. And the other aspect, so we've got more to choose from. And there's no question about it. We've got more proven success, and that helps us have a little bit more visibility into our opportunity going forward versus where we started last time around. The second piece is in the cost structure. We spent the better part of the last 7 years managing our cost structure And we also don't have the MLB license anymore, which I think we've said before, Hank, that it was a $30 million loss in fiscal 12, or was the last time we spoke about that. But that was a pretty big albatross hanging around our necks, and that's gone at this point. So our cost structure is much better than it used to be, and our revenue outlook is much better than it used to be. So that's what gives us our confidence.
Okay. I've got one more question on the iPad. I don't know if there's any questions in the audience. All right, let me go to this one, which is, can Take-Two's content be monetized in other ways outside of the video game space, i.e. a GTA movie or television series, or unlocking value by selling a license for such ventures?
Yeah, the answer to that is it can. Without question. And we've had interest coming in, not just for Grand Theft Auto, but for a bunch of our properties. Most of our major properties, we've had interest, either from television or film or otherwise. We do sell merchandise at this point, but it's not material. So there is some monetization there. But the answer is, of course it is. And then you just have to do the math and what the risks are associated with it. And unless you're really willing to take a significant risk in investing in entertainment properties, it's very difficult. Like, for example, movies. If you're going to invest in a movie, you can make a lot of money on movies. But as a licensor, you've got to look at what the success rate is, what the movie has to do for you to generate substantial economics that are worth taking the risk on whatever the franchise risk. So if it's a bad movie, does that hurt your franchise or not? So there's always a balance that has to be struck there. But obviously we consider those inbound requests. We take those inbound requests. There are circumstances where we've actually done this, where we've optioned our content for film. So it's something we consider at this point, but again, it's not core to what we do.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Carl.
Okay, thanks, Ed. Thanks.